Sounds smooth.
Good morning, Lagos. It is Wednesday, the 21st of March, about 7:32. Time to jump into the national news headlines in detailed newspaper analysis. Joining Valentine and myself in the studio this morning for Freshly Pressed 981, we have got Kema is in the studio. Good morning, Kema Ufella Smith.
Yeah, good morning, Folu and Lagos. Good morning.
Yes, double the legal trouble because we also have Ikemesit, aka Judge Ike, up on Twitter.
Trouble? Did she use the word trouble?
I did.
Morning, Lagos. I'm just going to ignore you.
Never. But good to have you, Kema, sit around. We know that you are usually up and down the country, but nice to have you here. Lagos, great to have you here as well, and great to have you up on our YouTube page. Go over to youtube.com/smooth981FM Lagos. Hit the subscribe button, and you can watch our live streams, and of course catch up for yonks afterwards. Yonks is a word I'm going to be using from now on. And up on Twitter, send us your messages using the hashtag FreshlyPressed981, and from that same hashtag we will tweet what our WhatsApp number is so you can communicate with us that way. But Kema, let's talk about our first story. There is a response from the Defense Headquarters talking about the Amnesty International report, which came out just yesterday that we spoke about it here. And on Dapchi, they say no security force was informed of planned abduction. That is the official response from the Defense Headquarters. And they are pointing at Amnesty International and saying, listen, what are your ulterior motives? Because we've asked you previously what unit was informed of the convoy of Boko Haram fighters heading towards Dapchi where they abducted the schoolgirls? What numbers were used to inform the military police who did the contacting? And they say that Amnesty refused to communicate its findings to the federal government despite numerous investigations and requests, and therefore the only conclusion they can reach is that Amnesty is set out to undermine the outcome not just of the committee but of the military itself. Over to you.
Yes. If only the Defense Headquarters would spend half the time used in saving its name into intelligence gathering. If only they would do that. Because we always have this same issue. I think it has become a recurrent rhetoric from that quarter, because regardless of whichever president is in office, we always hear these things. When you have human rights abuses, and the international bodies, Amnesty International, for example.
Okay.
Yes, when they make known these revelations, they always come out and bring their counter. We didn't know about it. Now what Defense Headquarters is saying here is that we were not informed of the planned abduction. Now it makes me raise several questions. It raises questions of intelligence. Are you, by what you're saying, also implying that you didn't have any intelligence on this matter at all?
I don't think that's what's being said. They're just very clearly pointing out that the way that Amnesty put out the story to them is incorrect. So here's my question, right? Amnesty itself is not an organization that is without blame in terms of how world governments actually deal with Amnesty International. They have several times also been accused of this particular thing, of having ulterior motives when it comes to governments. So why should we believe what Amnesty has necessarily said? We can't entirely forget, but we know that militaries and governments will try to save their name. But is there anything incorrect with requesting for information as to what unit was reported to? Because if there was in fact a report to a particular unit of the army or the military and did not respond, that in itself is a serious problem.
Well, the truth is this. Amnesty International and several international bodies have been set up for a particular purpose. Now, how they get their facts, how they get their intelligence, really is to, and they bring out this. I want to also believe that before reports would have some basic form of internal scrutiny. The Defense Headquarters should simply go. Let's get the basics straighted out. The basics are very simple. Did you have intelligence? Come and brief the country. Did you have intelligence? Do you have any idea that these people are these people on your watch list? Do you know who these people are? You don't know. All you're doing is you're just discrediting the agency itself, saying that they have an ulterior motive. No, tackle the real issues. Let's get down to the main issues. I'm happy that we're making progress with Chibok. The election cycle is coming, so the government will want to score a political point by seeing that these girls are released quickly. But this is just me trying to have faith in our security agencies. Stop fighting people who are behind the people. Let's just get the real work done.
All right, thank you very much for that. We should not just be looking at clearing our name, we should be looking at doing something effective. Up next from ThisDay newspaper. In fact, the next two stories are quite closely related. So we'll see how we can switch back and forth between them. But essentially from ThisDay newspaper, Kema says, executive and legislature take budget controversy to the streets. Now, I'll be honest, Lagos, I read this story and I was more ashamed than I usually am of people sitting in certain offices.
That's a very high bar of shame, yeah.
It is more ashamed than I usually am. But essentially what happened is there have been posters that have been put up outside Parliament, the first of which says stop playing politics past the budget. And then there was a retaliatory poster put up to replace the first one that says ministers should be held responsible for the delayed passage of the budget. They should do the needful. Now, we do know that there is no love lost between the executive and the legislature. We know that there's been a lot of finger pointing and blame game going on. Who's responsible for this? The ministries, departments, and agencies have not come forward. But it's really, who's sponsoring these? Those posters must cost some money. What's going on? Where's that money coming from?
Interesting, considering that we don't have a budget, right? Yeah. So, but that's just a side note. This is just, I think you used the right word to describe this. It's shameful. It's shameful that we have politicized. So, let's look at the background and the context to this. This is the third year of the Buhari administration. The first budget was delayed. It was eventually passed, but the actual budget performance was something like 13%. The second budget was delayed. It was eventually passed. Budget performance, some analysts put it between 17 and 20%. We don't even have a budget for this year. So we already have a budget overhang of projects and services and salaries and all of these other things that are hanging from 2016 and 2017. And we are already bungling 2018. And we are staring, we are looking at another election cycle in the horizon. It is shameful, and both sides are to blame, for this. Let's not get it straight. The executive has accused the legislature of deliberately sabotaging the early passage of the budget with the elections looming. The president, when he presented the budget in December, called on the National Assembly to ensure that it's passed by January. But on the National Assembly side, they said they've had a situation where ministries, departments, and agencies have had issues defending the estimates that they bring before the National Assembly. Committees who have been interfacing with these agencies say during budget sessions they've either been denied audience with them or they've sent them packing because both sides were almost never on the same page with respect, to things. And so while the National Assembly has to do its job, and I think the executive is probably not really paying attention to this, the National Assembly in the end has budgetary and financial oversight with respect to how the federal government will spend its money within a particular year. The executive seems to think, and I think this is part of the operational thinking that sort of characterizes administration, that the National Assembly is just this rubber stamp body that is supposed to just A-OK everything that emanates out of the presidency. But that's not how democracies work.
Well, it's interesting you say, because when we go through details of the story, I mean, there are a lot of suggestions, a lot of sources that are unnamed in the story as well, which we have a habit of doing in our papers, that say, first of all, this executive has failed to accept that politics is about negotiations. It is about give and take. It is that simple. They say, the president will be acting friendly on one hand, then his aides will now be talking anyhow at the National Assembly. It's a quote
exactly
from this source.
I mean, even the president just had a meeting last week, right, with the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Yakubu Dogara, and the Senate President, Bukola Saraki, where they discussed that, amongst other things, the delayed budget and then the issue that we had with the EFCC and the NFIU and the Egmont Group and the suspension that didn't quite pan out.
Looming.
It's looming. It's still looming, Nigeria, but we've kicked that can down the road, and there was some optimism that we might see some movement on this. I mean, the National Assembly has sort of extended an olive branch. They've started considering nominees, for example, into the CBN and the Monetary Policy Committee.
Though, again, a source had mentioned again in this story that they're not very happy because he didn't prioritize the full release of funds for the implementation of their constituency projects.
That's the bane of
crucial to their re-election.
Yeah, it's crucial to their re-election, and it's the bane of the delayed passage, because in the thinking of federal lawmakers, these constituency projects are an avenue for them to reward their supporters and recoup their investment, and also show that they have something to do. Whereas on the presidency side, Buhari is like, this is a conduit of corruption. We can't fund this. But we've been doing this since 1990.
Like you said, it's give and take.
Give and take, and our administration, headed by a man that a lot of people will say is not it's not very good at giving, not very good. We've got a couple of messages very quickly. This one is in from Larry. He says, "So Amnesty International is above politics, Abi." While MI from Akoka says, "So Amnesty releases a report and you think they have ulterior motives, then prove beyond reasonable and unreasonable doubt that you are not culpable of said allegations." But Kema, we're still on this budget issue because in our next story, we've now been told from Punch newspaper, submit budget details to National Assembly by Friday. That's what the president has ordered the MDAs. Now, this is through the Secretary to the Government of the Federation, Mr. Boss Mustafa. I do love his name though. I think I need to name my child Boss. Yeah. But the circular came out on the 19th of March. A copy was made available to journalists. It is official. They're enjoining them to ensure that they comply in a timely fashion. Why must ministers be coddled to get information across to the National Assembly?
I honestly don't know. I mean, when I saw that the president has ordered MDAs to defend budget out, I'm like, wow. I mean, is it that
budget that has been sent since December?
Do you understand? But
that they were all aware,
but
that they submitted estimates to the
when the president starts ordering you around and telling you to defend your budget,
so
then,
they didn't know they were going to defend it.
Then you know the budget means a lot to the president.
You see, but also doesn't this create avenue for people to start suspecting within some of these agencies? Is there any are there funny dealings going on? Because why should these details be so difficult to get a hold of?
I'm getting to that actually, because when you start having these issues, you start asking people to defend their budget. It makes you wonder what exactly is going on. You know how Capitol Hill is, a bit blurry. The same thing here in our 3-arm zone. The more you look, the less you really see. Now, we obviously have never had a culture of accountability in the past in Nigeria. People just don't think you should be accountable for whatever. But this time, when you're talking about budget defense, first of all, on the one hand, yes, there's a real budget defense going on. You don't just make National Assembly a rubber stamp. But then, this is also the time where lots of monies exchange hands. You have to lobby your way through. You have to push for whatever it is you're asking for. So that's going to be going on. That's going on under the scene. And then you have the Fiscal Responsibility Act that has been brutalized so many times. Look, let's watch and see what this guy is doing.
We've been watching. We're seeing nothing so far. But okay. Up next from ThisDay newspaper, Ikemesit, the AU summit is prepared to sign their trade treaty without Nigeria. And now that's the headline from ThisDay. It wasn't said in so many explicit words, but we do know that President Kagame was in Rwanda recently. In his keynote address that he delivered, he did say, tomorrow we will sign a historic agreement creating a continental free trade area. The road to this point has been long indeed. It can be measured in decades, and we still have a few more steps to take. Now, there are rumors in Nigeria that the reason the president cancelled his visit is because Labour were not very happy with the direction the treaty was going in. Some are saying that it needs to be reconsidered, but we're really looking at least 53 African heads of states that have already gathered in Kigali in Rwanda. And as President Kagame said, this has been decades in the making. We have been talking about this for a long time, trying to promote intra-Africa trade. What is your take on the developments so far? And could we be shooting ourselves in the foot perhaps by not being in on the Continental Free Trade Agreement or Pact going on with other countries?
Indeed, has been decades in the making, and the first outlines of the treaty were actually put forward in 2012 for several reasons, including political developments in some of the key African economies, thinking Nigeria, South Africa, and Kenya at the time. The AFCFTA, they have to find a more elegant acronym to begin with, was piped low. So here's the thing, right? The concerns of labor, not just labor, the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria, were fairly legitimate. And in the thinking of the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria, I will encourage our listeners to go read this. But if I could just briefly paraphrase, they have concerns with some of the trade conditions that they feel might impede economic growth. So, for example, Man gave the example of the rules of origins and provisions in the trade treaty, which in their thinking cannot be adequately enforced to guard against the influx of EU goods into the Nigerian market. Remember, the EU has been trying for a couple of years to do a free trade agreement with ECOWAS and with a few of the other regional blocs, to sort of push, more European African trade, and Nigeria has been a prime opponent against this. They've talked about the fact that it could lead to dumping. So Nigeria's concerns is that under the AFCFTA, I got it this time, you could have a situation where which is imported from the European Union to a third African country could be relabeled as manufacturers, and so they've been like Nigeria should push for a renegotiation of this. Why this is coming up now is my challenge. I made mention in passing about the issue we had with the Egmont Group and the NFIU. Mm-hmm. This has been going on for decades. We've had a draft treaty since 2012. We know our Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which is supposedly implementing our African foreign.
The biggest concern is once more the Nigerian government backing out of an agreement that they have already pretty much acceded to. But let's move on to more stories.
This next story is from ThisDay. Swiss authorities were misappropriated under the former Nigerian oil minister Dan Etete, and some other people who have been penned in this case. Really, what's your analysis in this story?
Yes, the Malabu oil deal is something that we just keep hearing. You know, there's so much smoke about it, but we just don't see the fire yet. It's quite surprising that the Swiss authorities are coming out to say, look, we're going to block these accounts, because the Swiss government, you know, they are usually very much in the middle in such issues. They never come out to take a firm stand, but this one appears to be so glaring to them that they are saying we are blocking all the accounts linked to this thing. Now, this is regarding an oil block, OPL 245, you know, which is you know, in the Gulf, the Gulf, off our coast. Yes, off our coast. Yeah. And it was valued at about $1.3 billion, and then while the transaction was supposed to take place, so much bribe passed through different pockets. We're talking about over $801 million.
Almost the entire sum.
Almost the entire sum, my brother. And $801 million. And these monies went through so many hands. However, 13 people have been mentioned. 13 major people have been mentioned in this whole thing. Now, my next question is why haven't we had just a single arrest in Nigeria? We've not even had an official invitation to ask questions.
Because we've outsourced the criminal prosecution to Switzerland.
For a case that's regarded as one of the biggest corruption cases in Europe.
Thank you.
Ever.
The president hasn't said. So I'm wondering, who are the people being protected here? Why haven't we opened this case in Nigeria? Why isn't there dust over this case here? There's just so many questions and very few answers here.
We'll follow the investigation very closely and see where it leads. Now we'll go to the next story from the Punch. The headline: Safety. Federal government begins certification of Kano, Port Harcourt airports rather. We noticed that in the last 9 months, two airports have been, accredited or certified. Now the federal government has commenced certification of the Malam Aminu Kano International Airport, so the Port Harcourt Airport, in order to meet the safety standard of the International Civil Aviation Organization. Is regarded as a non-governmental organization, and it said the process of certification has been going on for the last 11 years, but just right now, just recently, we recorded success in 2 amongst the other ones. So, Kema, really, when we look at the story, what does this take us? How quickly can we get the others certified?
Okay, I think I'll just step in here. So this is an ongoing process. It seems like Lagos and Abuja were the first ones to scale through, which, when you think about it, if you are a frequent flyer here in Nigeria, you know that Lagos and Abuja probably are 2 most sane airports. So Kano and Port Harcourt are up on the block. There's this interesting quote by who was the person? Okay, the director of operations at the FAA, Captain Rabiu Yadudu, where he said, this is the first time a country in Africa has certified 2 airports. Other countries have only 1 certified airport, but in the last 9 months, we've been able to certify Lagos and Abuja. And I'm thinking, really?
So we're going to be celebrating little
successes. Okay, we're going to be celebrating that. But 2, is that even accurate? Because you're thinking, there's only 1 certified airport in South Africa. There's only 1 certified airport in Egypt. There's only 1 certified airport in Kenya.
Really?
No way. But that's by the way. So this is administrative. They'll look at such things as airport operations, safety, efficiency, security, and all of that stuff. They'll also go through the finances. I think this is probably a greater call to wider decentralization. I mean, the government essentially operates the airports here in Nigeria.
Beyond all the semantics, have you seen the Port Harcourt airports lately?
I have passed through the Port Harcourt airport 4 times this year. Trust me, it is a nightmare.
All right.
a living operational nightmare.
Let's see if we can take a couple of messages very, very quickly. Adesoa sends in this one up on WhatsApp saying, you know, it is sad that it's late in coming, but there is a need to take a second look. Why do we think Morocco is positioning itself to be a member of ECOWAS? Morocco has already signed a deal with Europe on trade. Stuff will be brought in from Europe to Morocco, relabeled and sent to other African countries with lower tariffs. We are going to have major issues. Nigeria is not ready, says Adesoa. We are not efficient production-wise, and we will suffer. There will be more job losses, says Adesoa. Very interesting stuff. Let's see if we can move on with the stories, and then we'll take some more messages.
So ThisDay is next with a headline: $9 million cash allegedly discovered in the home of ex-Amnesty boss Boroh. So last week the story covered and looked in and said, or rather, yes, the NIA said this monies belong to them because the
way the situation has been described by the EFCC spokesman, it leaves a lot to be desired. That's the first bit. Two, isn't it funny how it has become like a recurring habit where someone leaves this administration or someone is in contention against this administration and we find money conveniently in their apartments, in safety boxes? I'm just thinking, you know, remember the last time we had this kind of experience? I'm just waiting to see who will claim this one. There's also an interesting side note to this. Some folks in Niger Delta, the Reformed Niger Delta Avengers and 10 other militant groups are already threatening to attack oil installations if Boroh is not reinstated within 4 weeks, which is interesting because I've recently been in that region. There are some people who are just looking for an
opportunity to start. Yes,
looking for an excuse to do this. So this plays inconveniently into their hands.
On that note, we do have Devoe Okorie who stepped into the studio. We know the traffic sort of held him, so we forgive you this time, Devoe. Welcome. Thank you for joining us this morning on Freshly Pressed.
Cool traffic.
Cool Lagos traffic.
Let's move on very quickly. The next story is from the Vanguard this morning. Remember, you can send your messages to WhatsApp. The link is already posted on youtube.com/smooth981FM Lagos. So this one is from Vanguard. The headlines: we need Buhari's permission to effect withdrawal of personnel from VIPs. The IGP came out with this 24 hours after he made the announcement that they were going to start the investigations, or rather start withdrawing police officers or personnel attached to VIPs. And it says in this process that they've discovered that these police personnel attached to these personalities have little or no training because of the environments they've been involved with, really. Ikemesit, let's take a look at this story.
Oh, okay. So,
Devoe is on this.
Devoe, you probably speak at this, but I just want to mention in passing, we have about 335,000 police officers in this country. A third of them are attached to VIPs.
Even more than that. I think it comes up to 150.
Okay, there you go.
It's quite simple. We know the saga going on. The police IG has ordered withdrawal of policemen who have formed the Association of Bodyguards for politicians, public officers, private. Now he's saying that officers and politicians that he will require the permission of the president. Obviously, to even assign, you require the permission of the president. But most people are watching. Will the IG carry this through? Will he be able to? He's made a lot of pronouncements that we know have been backtracked. So we're waiting, we're watching. And it's funny to note that in this case, he blamed it on their portraying bad conduct. And
who's supposed
to be responsible for that?
Yeah.
But earlier on, he said it was simply because there were not sufficient officers to address the
What about the timing?
Yes, and they're not. So,
food for thought.
Yes.
Very good question. Ndukwe Onoha up on Twitter has sent in a message, but let's see if we can get the most recent version of that here. He says Buhari has essentially coming up next at 8:15 Sports Inside the Locker Room. Good morning.
The headlines.
That was a cameo.